think that should have started now.
Says live.
Right. Well, I'll open by saying hello and well to the second vlog by Believe in Magic Place. This one's on the subject of deduction with our special guest star Ben Cardall. I'd just like to start off by saying a huge thank you to Ben for doing this. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the members to hear your thoughts on that sort of stuff.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. The thing that I'd like to start off by discussing, and I think this is an important distinction to make in terms of definitions, just before we start getting into more methodological stuff, the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. I know a lot of people aren't quite familiar with where you draw the distinction between them two things.
Yeah. Well, it all started with Charles Sanders Peirce in the splitting up of the groups. He had a third one called abductive reasoning, which isn't nearly as kidnappy as it sounds. And, deductive reasoning basically is deriving point B from point A. Yeah. The attitudes of B, it forms a logical consequence. In other words, it's like deduction derives the consequences of the assumed.
Yeah.
I think that's a direct quote. Oops, I have just kicked my cereal bowl. Also, with inductive, then it's inferring. It's using the hub of the problem to infer solutions based from this.
Yeah.
Basically, what induction is, and then abduction is a lot like induction, and it relies on inference and the items which are placed in front of you, the details.
Yeah.
You form almost a logical fallacy of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty much it in a nutshell. But in my opinion, when you say deduction to somebody nowadays, everybody knows what you mean, and everybody knows the kind of thought processes that are involved to a certain degree. It's more like deduction belongs in the Urban Dictionary. It's one of those words that everybody understands the implied meaning behind it, whether you go into exact detail or not. Whether you say, I'm using inductive theory. It's just names. We all know the method that's getting us there, really. And yeah. That's that in a nutshell.
Okey-dokey. Right, well, since there's a distinction between the two, like you say, inductive reasoning is more sort of bringing your own opinions into stuff. It's inferring on based upon context and based upon your understanding.
Yeah.
I think what I'd ask is sort of how do you make those leaps? So sort of when do you decide I've got enough deductions to make a specific leap? And how far away from all the initial sort of basic evidence are you willing to go before you say this isn't likely anymore?
Well, it's to me, and this is all I can talk about is my opinion and my research, my thoughts on it. To me, it all boils down to that almost famous Holmes quote: "When you've excluded the impossible, whatever else remains, however improbable, must be the truth." And that's how I describe every situation to that degree. Once you've gone through, excuse me, once you've gone through the aspects of the impossibilities of the situation, what's left is either going to be exactly true or plausible, and you look at the evidence in front of you to figure out which path it goes down. For example, like in my lecture notes, I put up a little picture of a biker-looking fellow with long beard, big arms, covered in tattoos, and I cut the picture off at the bottom. So I've cut out the important bit, and all you can see is the biker like this. You just see his arms, and he's looking down like this. Now, from that, you can draw conclusions based on your own opinions of bikers and what the people who are bikers might be. But that's based on your opinions and emotional thoughts. When you start looking at the rational process of the situation, you look at things like his facial expressions. Is he showing any forms of this cliche anger? Or is there any tension to his muscles, like he's doing something that he shouldn't be? What are the people in the background doing? And then that's when you start to look at the deductions you've made. So if you see there is no anger in his face, there's no tension in his muscles, there's no tension in the jaw showing any frustration, the people in the background aren't bothered by what's going on. So you look at these things and then you can deduce, or rather induce, from this the situation that's cut off. And when I cut off, he was actually hugging a small boy. Yeah. Because most people in that thing, they ignore the rational process and follow an emotional thought. So you see a big biker, you know, you follow stereotypes and all this other way of thinking. That's basically the process that you need to go through. You need to look at the steps and see where that gets you to. Once you hit the block, then you're either going to have to deduce from this the improbable stuff and move forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What I would say is, based on the idea that people sort of get a general image of what a biker might be doing, obviously this is something we all do all the time anyway. You naturally draw inferences based on your surroundings. It's like if you walk past a car with a pair of legs sticking out underneath, you automatically assume there's the rest of a person attached to it. It's
absolutely
natural assumptions. I think the difference is that some of the assumptions we make are sort of quite broad and not really based in a lot of evidence.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you've got a negative experience of a certain type of person, you might automatically impart that bias onto the stuff that you're perceiving.
Precisely.
So, how would you say is the best way to sort of make these assumptions that you make more specific, to sort of train yourself to just see things for how they actually are as opposed to imparting bias?
Yeah, a lot of it is it's learning to see things in a new way. It's learning to think in a different way, because, as you say, it is so natural to just do that. It's again, and I'll probably do this a lot. I'll quote the books. Emotions are antagonistic to clear reasoning, which is exactly the truth. We know from any sort of highly emotionally charged situation that we've had in our lives that we can't think clearly. We can't rationalize the process because our emotions are clouding us with so much things that are going on. I had a massive experience of that at the Minds Convention. My emotions were going, and I just couldn't really think clearly, and I started to sweat, and then it spirals out of control, and you can't follow the true logic of the situation. You can't see the woods for the trees, as it were.
Yeah.
So a lot of it to start, it's got to be baby steps. You can't initially break a behavior overnight. You can't just snap it and change a completely new way of thinking after so many years of being thinking in a completely different way. So take the legs under the car scenario. You walk past, and then what's a natural splay of legs? What does skin naturally look like? Are they male? Are they female? What kind of shoes are they wearing? Because if the legs had a pair of high heels on, that would initially send up the red sparks. That's not typical mechanic-based shoes. There shouldn't really be a person under there.
Some strange esque character.
Yeah, it raises more questions, and then when you start answering these questions, you're learning to think more clearly. Once you start the ball rolling, it becomes a process that you just get used to. Yeah. It's like learning a new behavior, learning a new hobby. I always use the driving analogy when talking about this. When you get into a car, it's all ignition, signal, mirror, seatbelt, gears, car's coming. But eventually, after you've been doing it for so long, you get in and go. That's the idea with it. So once you start examining these situations for what they are, you learn to recognize the signs, and you learn to see and observe the situation, which is two entirely different factors. Those old adages of the silhouette pictures. It looks like two faces, but it could be the candlestick holder. Those kind of things.
Yeah.
It's like
green one's quite good.
yeah. And it's the same thing. It's learning to see things in a new way. It's a process. It's if you're that keen on starting then you've got to keep the ball rolling, because you know, if you only did one press up every couple of days, you'll never feel the benefit. It's a continual process of practice, examining situations.
So yeah, obviously, this is more about sort of training the way that you naturally see things. So it's not so much what you'd call deduction as much as a sort of learned intuition.
Yeah.
It's sort of just homing your intuitive abilities to naturally know stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think the contrast to this would be stuff that you actually memorize, sort of data and information that you naturally just store within your mind to make different deductions.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's as I was saying the other day. If you come across a chap in a post office and you're practicing, and he's got an emblem on his polo shirt of the company he works for, if you haven't got the data stored, or you can't deduce from it. So it's all about storing and filing appropriately the right amount of information to use from this. It's you know, I'll do another quote: data cannot make bricks without clay, and that's precisely the point. If you haven't got the information stored, or it could be true knowledge that you pick up in everyday situations, because that's one of the most frequent things that we can do, or it's something that you've set out to actually learn. And but yeah, so if you file the right information or memorize it, you know, as it were, then it's there with which you can deduce information from. You can induce information, adduce information from.
Yeah.
It's got to be stored correctly, though, because like I said the other day, I saw it in a brilliant TED talk on memory. This guy started throwing playing cards all over the place, all over the stage.
Yeah.
We all know what's in the playing card stack. We know them in their entirety, but we go through in order. But you'd look at this mess on the stage, and somebody say, right, I'm looking for the 4 clubs, and you go, I know it's there somewhere.
Yeah.
Not because it's stored in any order or any set positions, you know. But that's a different thing altogether. It's storing information. But yeah, take the time to learn to memorize. Almost, you know, it's only seemingly asinine if you believe it to be asinine. When I first started memorizing pet names, I remember Charlie thinking, "What are you doing? You fool! You're wasting time." And then when it got to the point where I could start to guess pet names and yeah, get close on pet names, you know, and you know, you start to point out the logical reason for going through this. It's like anything. I memorized pet names, so I got good at that. People spend years on the perfect classic pass, so they get good at that. People spend years on a coin roll, so they get good at that. It's just because it's a bit different, you know, that people don't tend to see the value in it. So when you use it for deduction, it's something quite different, you know. It's an impossible reading. Yeah, and I'm waffling. I'm going off topic. Steer me straight. Go on.
No, while we're on the subject of memory and stuff like that, I think something that would be, well, certainly a question I've got is when you're seeing, for example, pieces of information, obviously you remember that information in terms of words. You might remember it as the sound of the words being said, or as writing. So, for example, you use the example of being at your school and having filing cabinets full of information. My question would be, when you're looking at symbols and stuff, maybe tattoos and things like that, how do you remember the image? Do you just photograph the image in your mind, or do you convert the image into sort of a list of characteristics that would be written down within the filing cabinets?
There we go. You're back. Sorry, it froze then for a bit.
Oh, right. My question is, if you get a sort of symbol or an image or something like that, obviously normally things are held in the forms of like text or speech or something like that. But with an image, do you just photograph in your head what it looks like, or do you sort of list the characteristics and have that written down in the filing cabinet?
To me, I think that's all idiosyncratic to the person doing it. Yeah. Because we all, with memory, the almost carnal rule is that it's got to be ridiculous and hyped up, and so it's better to memorize.
Yeah.
But even with them, things like that, aspects of ridiculousness are idiosyncratic to the person.
Yeah.
So what I always cite is, like, at any point, if somebody said to you, you know, I want you to imagine you're in your kitchen. You go up to the cutlery drawer or the cutlery basket, whatever. How many knives are in there? You've never taken the time to memorize it, and I bet most people would get close, or, you know, even spot on to a certain degree. And that's the case of there's no ridiculousness there. There's no practice. There's no mnemonics. It's idiosyncratic to the situation. So it's about creating something that's designed specifically for that. Yeah. So if for some stupid reason you did want to memorize how many knives you've got in your kitchen, you'd picture your kitchen in your head, the knife place, then whatever stands out based on that. You know, I always think of cutlery as mini mirrors.
Yeah. It's
just something that sticks out in my mind. I don't know why, it does. So I can imagine there's sharp mirrors for the knives, quadrant mirrors for the forks, and so on and so forth. That's what sticks out in my mind, but it wouldn't necessarily work for somebody else. So in that essence, you could take something, an aspect or a characteristic of the object, or you could just take the time to know precisely what it is based on how many times you've used it. It's all about what works for you. So it's definitely getting used to how you think, and more importantly, when memorizing something, your first initial reason for memorizing this is something that will help it stick longer. So, like, say, with the knives thing again, if I wanted to change it to I don't know, so something covered in blood, because knives are essentially quite stereotypically a horrible thing, and that's what something would stick out. Yeah. That might not necessarily work for me because I had to stretch for it. I had to imagine it in my mind. But initially, when I was coming up with ideas of how to memorize it, little mirrors stuck out. So that'll be the first thing that pops up every time. You know, that'll be my mnemonic for knives. And it's all about using the different memory techniques that are out there, trying them, see which one works best for you, and then that will get better retention and recall for you, because everyone, as we all know, think in so many different ways. We feel things in so many different ways. We find things funny that other people don't find funny, which is how we remember more, because it appeals more to us. So if you follow that line specifically and don't follow, you know, completely the ideas in textbooks and works, that say you have to do this to memorize this, you have to think of this to memorize this. You're following somebody else's thought. If you stick more with your own ideas, your own thinking, your own colourful nature, then they will be retentive. The retentive capabilities will be much better in a memory plan.
Getting back onto the deduction and stuff like that, once you've memorized all this information, obviously it's a case of trying to be purely logical when you're looking at it. It's a case of looking at things and listing off things you've memorized and what they might infer. And I'm just thinking, when you go through this process, you naturally start to make assumptions about where these things are going. You start to sort of guess in your head what this might all mean in the end. So how do you sort of overcome that so that it doesn't sway which direction your deduction is going to go in? Because obviously, if you're working towards a particular goal, you'll make things fit.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of get rid of all your ideas and sort of clear your mind to see things how they actually are?
That's again, it's practice with quietening the emotional bias in your head. You know, that little voice that we've all got in there, and not in a schizophrenic sense. We all know that we can hear a little voice inside our head that says, whatever. That's normal. That's standard. And it's the matter of whether we listen to it. That, like, we step in a situation and go, oh, this is going to be difficult. Well, how do we know it's going to be difficult? You know, blah 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 blah. So it's all about learning to quiet it. And there are a couple of exercises I found quite beneficial for allowing me to do this. I mean, don't get me wrong, the ataraxia helps a lot, but that can only go so far. So one I took was one of Bruce Lee's ideas on relaxing, on quieting the mind. And what he would do is he would get 2 sets of earphones. He'd plug one in this side and one in this side. And on this side would be some relaxing windpipe, whale song, whatever you find to be relaxing music.
Yeah.
And on this side there would be the heaviest, thrashiest metal that there ever possibly was. And it's all about learning to focus your own mind and your own thoughts to be able to still hear this so clearly, even though this is going on in the other side of your brain, and that parallels this way of thinking. Even though we've got our emotional side often intruding, get me words out, intruding on our logical processes, a lot of the time it's learning to say, no, you quiet down, I'm attacking this from a rational basis. And it's all about practice, because it's again, it's learning a new way of thinking, it's learning a new way of feeling about things. And once you learn to quiet that emotional side, you won't fall foul as often to things like confirmation bias or emotional bias. These kind of things will often trip you up a lot in deduction, because, to use a Bruce Lee quote, it's like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you'll miss all the heavenly glory. Now, if you go into a situation expecting to see certain things based on your emotional bias, or just inferring certain things based on your emotional bias, then you will miss the truth of the matter of what's going on. So once you've got this amount of information in your head, it's an ongoing process that's live, that you can only really feel the accuracy of it by doing it more. So there's a bloke in front of you. You see he's a tall bloke. He's wearing workman's boots, the kind with steel toe caps. But there's dark, wet mud on the tips of the toes. But it's not raining outside. So where do you know in your head, in the local area, that he could possibly pick this up based on the fact that his boots were workman boots? Clearly, would this be from a builder's yard? Is he working in the local places? And these are the kind of questions that you go through. You don't immediately think, he must have been out in the field playing football, because you're a football fan.
Yeah.
You don't fall foul of those emotional hurdles in that sense. And emotional, it doesn't always necessarily have to mean the bad things. They can be the good things as well. You can impart your emotional biases of things that mean a lot to you onto other people, even though they could be completely wrong. And it's learning to quiet your own mind, and you can only do that through practice, I've found.
Yeah.
This is just what I found. The more you practice to go, this little voice in there, the more you tell it to shut up, the more it'll listen. It's like developing a relationship with the little person inside your head, in essence.
Yeah. Another thing I'd mention is, like you say, you were talking about the mud on the boots as a specific example. What do you do if you come to someone and they're seemingly average in every sense? So I mean, stuff like you look at their shoes and there's no mud, but they're not particularly clean.
Yeah.
Average level of scuff, and everything about them is seemingly average. What do you do?
Well, then that's taking the questions that are raised in an entirely different way. If there are no real physical traits, then you look at the obvious traits of said boot, like or said shoe. Is it a trainer that fits with the aesthetic of this person? Because if it was I don't know, a particular chavvy person, and he's wearing his Burberry baseball cap tipped off to one side, yet he had a pair of New Rocks on. That would raise questions. That would raise questions in a conflict of personality. Has he borrowed the shoes? Do they fit him? And it just starts new questions forming once you attack the situation from a logical and rational perspective. Do their body types suggest anything? Are they particularly big built? Are they particularly, and I say this in a nice way, rotund around the midriff? And then this would raise new questions about their lifestyle. Do they have any visible markings? Are they clean shaven, unshaven, particular pattern? Is their hair brushed? Have they got gel in? Is there a particular style they've gone for? And you know, as daft as it sounds, you know, a lot of people will wear their tastes and their life in some description or some degree. Like me, I'm particularly average looking now. My hair's a mess, and I'm wearing a dressing gown. I'm sat on the sofa. So the questions that would be raised: why is his hair a mess? It's a specific time of the morning. So why is he wearing a dressing gown? There's clearly no top on underneath, so it must be for some other reason. The dressing gown with a top on underneath would suggest that he put it on to keep it warm. Maybe he's just got up. And you know, these questions are the things that start to roll out, and the more you can provide answers, the more accurate your deductions will be. And that's for every situation, because you know, when a lot of the times I do this, I'm out working. It's at gigs and stuff, and people will have gone through this specific preening process to clean themselves of everything from the day. And then, so that raises more questions. Are their clothes expensive, inexpensive, borrowed, tattered? You know, do they fit them well? So would they be their clothes? What sort of shoes are they wearing? Are they high heels, flats, boots? What size? Physical body type? Are the gents shaven? Are the ladies wearing dangly earrings that are massive and gaudy? Are they tiny refined ones? Can we see the mark of any tattoos protruding from it? And we've got all this information to work with. It's a matter of learning to see what's there, just what you're presented with, and deducing, inducing, abducing from what you see, and it could be anything. Because even as I said the other day, if you got a person that's emotionally dead, they don't react in any way to any question you ask them.
Yeah.
If they're bald, so you know their hair can't say anything. They're clean shaven. They're wearing just a normal, colorless black suit.
Yeah.
New shoes, which would seem, you know, to not suggest a whole much, but then it suggests new questions. Are they controlling their emotions, or is it natural? Did their hair fall out? Do they shave their head? Can you see any patterns that's receding? Is the suit new? Is it? And then these questions that rise again. And either way, no matter what situation you're placed in, you've got something to deduce from.
I think my next question would be, you mentioned stuff based on gauging the type of person, their control of emotions and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you see physical characteristics, it might say something about what they've been doing throughout the day. It might say something about what they generally do as a hobby or that sort of thing. Mm. When you do something based on emotion, obviously your emotional level doesn't have a direct impact on your physical traits, so it's kind of imparting bias in a particular sense. So how do you train yourself to recognize emotions? What are you looking for? Is it facial expressions? What sort of stuff can tell you about someone's psychology?
Personally, it's placing them into everyday situations, and then it's how you would expect a textbook normal person to react, and whether they deviate from that baseline in any way. So yeah, absolutely. You know, you can start off with the micro expression training. Do they react to them in a normal way? Can you see that there is any physical control going on in the face? If so, why are they controlling this emotion and letting this one run free? This, that, and the other. Are they standing in a particular way that suggests they're uncomfortable, or are they in pain, or whatever? Because even if we were to stay completely clear of, you know, the textbook classroom approach to a normal person, we have enough social implications in our life that we can almost sort of come up with this idea of what we expect a normal person to be. And yeah, in some essence, that is an emotional bias, but that's based on all the sociological aspects that we've seen and what the TVs tell us are right and wrong. Yeah. And then we develop our own opinions from this. But it can be seen in a similar sense to textbooks. These are textbooks telling us what's right and wrong. So if we go from a baseline of a person that we deem to be normal, we can compare that to how we think about it. So I deem the normal social human interaction to be, if you see them actively engaging in conversations, then there will be some gestural movements going on.
Yeah.
There will be head nodding, to show that you are engaged in the conversation. You'll be expressing to a certain degree. Not a lot of people talk with their hands, but they point to things that they are thinking about, and this shows active engagement.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for things from an emotional aspect, from a body language aspect, from a medical aspect almost, then you can use these to gauge their emotional standing. It's often said that once you get into that natural rapport with somebody where they start gesturing like you do, they might yawn at the same time you do, they may scratch or cross their legs at the same time you do, because you've got into that mirroring scenario, that somebody who can naturally break that cycle deviates ridiculously from the norm. So because it's such a a social implication, it's one of the markers for psychopathy, and that's a textbook, almost textbook deduction. If somebody after a rapport-based conversation doesn't seem to show any rapport back, then that's something with which we can deduce from. It's information for us to work from.
Yeah. I'm just thinking in terms of actually, because you mentioned about sort of gaining your own idea of what sort of people would act like in a certain situation, which is based on just sort of your social understanding of the things that you generally perceive. So how do you go about data collection in this way? Is it something that you just sort of get a general overview for, or do you look for specific behaviours and categorise in your head? You categorise statistically what people are likely to behave?
Well, that is absolutely an aspect of it. For me, that's absolutely an aspect of it. Because again, I'll state more times than you care to hear that this is only my opinions, and I've never had a teacher in this kind of thing. But my idea with data collection is I need to collect as much from as varied a thinkers as possible.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to be prepared for almost any situation that will arise, and we all know that there is a plethora of situations that can pop up, I need to be prepared. So if I focus my attention too much on data collection from one specific person's way of thinking, or from how I feel about their way of thinking, then that might cut off just a barrel load of other ideas and valuable ideas. And it's only from having so much to work from and doing it again as often as what you do, that you can see the things that are valued, that you can see the things that are of value to you in the situations you're working and deducing in. Like for a policeman to be, to use a stereotype, a policeman to be deducing things about people, he or she would use much different information than maybe me or you would use when we're out performing, because it's a different kettle of fish, it's different people, and it's only by preparing for these situations that we can hope to achieve any accuracy from it. So I think, in short, what I do is, like, say, for example, I say I read a psychology textbook or a profiling textbook or something like this, and I'll remember the points that stick out to me. Go, I can find something useful in that, or I can find something useful in that. That's creative. That's what we do as artists, performers, whatever. We find the things that work for us, and then we go out and we use them. Then it's only in using them can we truly understand how useful they are. So they point out the base. Okay, maybe that didn't work so well. So maybe I need to do more research on that aspect of it. And it's only through doing it, that you can see the light and the dark of the matter. So where you've got to research more, where you've got to provide more background information, any statistics, any reasons, any studies, any aspect whatsoever I can get my hands on, I will read and work.
Yeah.
Like when I said to chaps at the Minds convention who asked, when we were doing the chapter on shoes, we went through it, in the end of it, close to 2,500 different studies and pairs and practicing and training to see exactly what would work, what's the most reliable, what's the not most unreliable situations to be in with this information to go from. And it's only from getting this wider range of study to find out, doing it, to find out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope that answers that.
Something I'd mention, because obviously I do a lot of script writing and stuff like that. So from a script writing point of view, I think deduction's interesting for a couple of reasons. The first of which would be that when writing script, it's often, even if you're presenting it in a magical sense, it's often pragmatic to include a logical descriptor. So it might be something like facial expression reading, something like that. I think deduction can be good for that sort of thing because it's a different avenue to go down. To suggest that you might be a deductionist is different to suggesting you might be a psychologist. In the same way that if you were doing close-up magic, you might suggest that you're a sleight of hand artist. You might suggest that it's some sort of science, something like that. I think deduction as a tool is more similar to sleight of hand demonstrations, gambling demonstrations, than it would be magic, because it does have a logical premise.
Yeah.
But my question with that would be, how do you stop that from coming across as showing off? How do you approach someone and get it in a way that makes them feel emotionally validated without it seeming like it's just you demonstrating a skill that they can't have?
Yeah, without coming across like an arrogant know-it-all. To me, that's all about how personable you are.
Yeah.
Whether you can breach anyone's emotions, in my opinion, with anything if they relate to you.
Yeah.
So if you don't stand there and go, well, I can see from your blah 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 that you are a blah 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 blah, and I'm obviously clearly going to be right, then you're clearly coming across like a bit of a tool.
Yeah.
So if you relate to them in a way, and it's those rapport-based things, ask them questions, let them ask you questions. Let's have a conversation as friends. Let's not stick this barrier up of spectator, performer, amazement, emotional reaction. I'm going off to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll do my best to remember their names, so if they come up to me later and they start, oh, you did this thing, I'll be like, oh, thanks, John, that was really nice. Because everyone likes to hear their own name. They know then that they have made an impact on your life, and it's just something as small as remembering their name.
Yeah.
So if you're doing something like as purely deductive, and you're in the situations where you can, or don't necessarily have to. It all depends on the person and thing. If you're reading them, go for the positives. Don't stay to the negatives.
Yeah.
Go to the positives, but touch lightly on the negatives. Acknowledge that you can see them, but it's okay. We'll move on. And then it becomes a bit of a joke, and then they enjoy the negatives a little bit, as much as anybody can acknowledge them in a smiley way.
Yeah.
It's all about, for me, whether I'm performing, tricks or effects as well. When I'm out there with them, I want to have a conversation. I want to be talking to them, because when I get this going, their emotions are involved then, and I can push up the barriers of their emotional involvement to make them feel, whatever I need them to feel from the situation. Like, say there's a particular comedy-based routine, like say I'm doing something from John Archer's work, where we all know there's implied hilarity in that from everywhere. And then afterwards, I want to go into something quite meaningful and whatever. So they're enjoying it. We're all laughing. It's like, no. We've clearly just had a laugh now. So I've got your emotions running. Your emotions have been brought to the center. So I want to see then how telling they are of the kind of beautiful human you are inside. But compliments, they're involved then. Yeah. So, to me, with my script, I take very much a Jay Sankey approach. I've got these lines, these points that I will get across that are staple in the whole routine. There's this line that sets this phase up, or there's this line that sets this phase up, and everything else that happens in between is about me and the people in front of me. It's not about me standing up. I want to get them involved, you know. I want to get them, you know, even if I don't need them to hold a pen, I'll be here, hold a pen. Here, hold the card case. Here, hold this. They're involved then, you know. They feel something about it. It's not just sitting back and watching this wondrous person tell wondrous things. You can get them involved with something as small as holding an object. They're important then. They're important because they're holding this. They don't know that it's completely irrelevant. They don't know that it could just as easily have gone back into your pocket and no one would have known. They feel, therefore they're involved. That's my thinking.
I'm just thinking in terms of a show writing sort of perspective as well. Yeah. Would you ever sit down and, as I know when you're writing shows, it tends to take the form of one trick after, or one routine after another. Yeah. Would you ever do a whole effect, a whole routine of just deduction, or do you sort of apply it in with maybe something like Spectator as mind reader, where you perform deduction and then I've had them read something from you showing that they've got a natural sense of intuition as well? Or are you comfortable to just sit there and deduce things and let that stand as a routine?
For me, it would depend largely on the gig. Like, yeah. Say for example, you know, fingers crossed, one day we all get that theatre gig where there's 2,000 people sat right in front of you. Yeah. I would be happy to do 5 minutes of pure reading. Yeah. Whatever. Because I know and I'm confident enough that I can garner hits to make it impressive. Yeah. That's just 5 minutes though. I wouldn't do any longer for a venue like that. What I would do then is I would pepper it in amongst the routines afterwards, so that should, God forbid, the deduction horribly go wrong, I've still got the mechanics of this wondrous effect to fall back on. But whereas within a close-up scenario, there's gigs I've done before where I've done maybe an hour and a half of pure deduction, and that's based on the fact that I know I'm going to work for a builders club dinner. So I know that there'll be a lot of information, a lot of big personalities, a lot of big tells to work from, a lot of information. So I know I can do it, but I would. From then on, we've still got proper stuff that you can fall back on. Even if you're having a completely horrible night where you're off, you've still got this stuff to fall back on. Yeah. So it's about being prepared as a performer, you know.
Yeah. In terms of, like you mentioned, doing deduction as a sort of reading, what do you think of applying deduction to sort of other reading techniques? So this might be things like Barnum statements, it might be things like Kent and Nepper style language, where you impart some sort of belief onto somebody with your language. What do you think of actually peppering genuine deduction with these other methods? And on top of that, how can you keep a constant flow of language when you're peppering it with these other little techniques?
Yeah, practice. It's the situation again. If I'm gonna do, you know, almost a faux psychic routine where I'm using these Barnum statements as part of it, I will try the deductive side first, because that's going to be the more direct, where I talk about your job as a bull. I talk about your love of whatever, or your favorite drink, or you know, direct. What I'm saying, I wouldn't obviously point, but these direct aspects of it, then I find that it's going a bit. I've got the Barnum statements to come back to, and it's all about making those Barnum statements or the Nepper language fit who I am. Would I say this in this way? So, like, say I'm doing the classic Barnum statement of the scar on my left knee. I wouldn't say it as it's written in the book. I would say it differently. So if I'm saying it as a textbook scenario, then subconscious or otherwise, they're going to pick up on the fact that this is a robotic line.
Yeah.
So it's all about, for me, is making those other ways of speaking. You integrate them with who you are.
Yeah.
Because if you get a line that you are just regurgitating, it's not going to fit with the whole vernacular of your speech. It's going to be like if I was talking quite as I do, and I'm talking and I gesticulate a lot. I talk with my hands, and I get to this line. There'll be something, this emotional peak where I'll stop gesticulating for a minute, and then I'll do the line.
Yeah.
Something will come back out. Something leaks, and a lot of the time people pick up on this subconsciously, and they don't feel as great about that line as they should have done because it feels like it sticks out. So if you take the time to adapt it to your own way of talking, or take the ideas that are coming over from the Barnums or Nepper's language, or any other way of reading, tarot, palm reading, whatever. If you take the ideas that are there and put them into how you use words and how you speak, then it's all going to be, it's all going to be strings to the same bow. Essentially, it's all going to feel like one flowing, normal, natural conversation, whether you're moving from deduction to palm reading to anything else. If it's flowing out as part of your normal conversation, and no red herrings are going to go up.
Yeah, yeah. I was just going to mention as well, what do you do if you're sort of deducing something and you don't come to one logical conclusion?
Yeah.
So then you might follow a string of evidence and come to the fact that there might be two conclusions. Do you just put that off pure probability, or is there some technique you use? For example, if you were doing card work or something like that, you might throw out a guess.
Yeah.
Like, you might say it's not a 5, is it? And
Yeah.
then
I'm with you.
that outline. But do you do that with deduction, or do you just guess based on probability?
No, I never guess. It's a shocking habit, destructive of the logical faculty. You set me up for that quote. No, absolutely. There will be times, obviously, because they're so varied that you get to it, and you've got one or two different avenues to go down, and that all depends again on the person you are as a performer. Me, when I'm in that situation, I'll go, there's a couple of things, and I feel more strongly about one than I do the other. I'll tell you, I'll kick myself if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Roll the dice. Try and get a 6. Why not?
I was thinking as well, in terms of guessing, sometimes obviously guesses can go horribly wrong.
Yeah.
The example was that a while back I was doing a gig, and it was for a charity function, and surely enough they sat me in the corner with the psychic lady, as if we were one and the same. So that was
he's a wizard.
But towards she got a woman over, and she was performing a reading for this lady, and it was the ghost of her dead mother coming through, which was all a bit ghastly in general, considering it was predominantly Barnum statements. And towards the end of the reading, it probably wouldn't have been the end of the reading, but it very quickly became the end of the reading.
Yeah.
I said to her, your mother's telling me that you should dye your hair back to the colour that it used to be. She's telling me that she preferred it the last way you had it. And then it turned out this woman was wearing a wig, so didn't even dye her hair. And obviously that sort of thing is going to come across 1 in a million times.
Yeah.
It's not very prominent. It's not
a run-of-the-mill. It's not a run-of-the-mill situation to be in.
What do you do if you fail to that extent? Do you just take it on the chin, or do you just do you take that information in and use it to infer upon other things? What do you do about that situation?
I would, but that's because I don't present as a psychic.
Yeah.
If I don't know, how would I word something like that? Your previous hair color before this was much better. I see that it would have suited you more. She's like, no, I wear a wig. Well, have you always worn that same wig?
Yeah.
It's a question then. It can be a different hair color. It can be a different wig. It raises new questions. And she's like, even if she's like, yeah, I've always worn the same wig. Oh. I still think red hair would have suited you better. So, it comes across as a personal comment. You know, I've taken almost a deductive leap, a leap of faith that's crashed and burned. But I turned it into a social aspect. I turned it into a social comment, a social conversation, a compliment. And she's gone away thinking, not embarrassed by the fact that she's had to acknowledge she's wearing a wig or hating me for this. She's gone away thinking, you know, should I change my wig to a different colour? Is he right? Is he wrong? Or, you know, no, bugger off, I'm not changing it to red. She's gone away feeling something about it. It's changed to a normal social aspect. It doesn't become that effect anymore, and that's the advantageous thing about deduction reading. They can go in any way you want, because you know, if you're doing a card trick and it goes wrong, and you mess up your double lift, you see the cards play, and you go, I see you got 2 cards there. Well, I just with the shut up.
Yeah.
There's limited ways you can turn that around. You know, I'm not saying you can't, but there are much less ways to turn that around than there is if I'm just talking to you. You know? Yeah.
So the way you talk about deduction and stuff, it's much more conversational than I think a lot of people realise. I think a habit that a lot of magicians, mentalists get into is that they think everything's got to be an effect.
Yeah.
So my question would be, you say when you're on the bus and stuff, you might start doing deductions, you might use that as a way of practicing.
Yeah.
How would you go about asking someone if those deductions were correct? Would you go into an effect, or would you just ask them what's the...
Me? I ask them.
Yeah.
But that's just me. It wouldn't bother me in the least going up to somebody. Can I just ask what do you do for a living? And then they say, I don't know, I'm a postman. Hey, oh, thanks. You wander off.
Yeah. So do you not explain at all about the sort of thing you do?
I've been in the situations where I have, and it's like where I've gone up to this group of people in a bar. It was at the uni bar when I was at university, and I'm trying to figure out ways to deduce any signs of what they do, what their course topic is.
Yeah.
And so the only way I can definitively get any answers from them is if I write down my thoughts. I go up to them and I introduce myself, talk about what I'm doing, and I just put the card down on the table. And so, can I just ask, what is it each of you are studying? Now, I'm in a situation where if I'm right, I can go, oh yeah, that's what I thought, and they go, or if I'm wrong, then I can pick the card up, write something else on it, and do an effect with it, go into something incredible with it. It's all about who you are as a person and what personally fits for you. A lot of people won't be happy with going up and just talking to somebody and saying, what is this, or tell me about that, or especially in Stoke, you get a lot of people quite angry with you for talking to them about your personal lives. But again, there's nothing wrong with going up and an impromptu performance. Yeah. We all know that we learn about people when we're off working anyway. So yeah, if it was the card magician, pick a card, any card. What's your name? What do you do for a living? It's normal, standard conversation that comes out when you're introducing yourself, when you're speaking to somebody for the first time. It's what happens, and it's about how comfy you are doing that and making that work for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my situation. If I'm on the bus and I've got an idea that I'm not entirely sure of, I'll go and ask them. It's the only way that I'm ever going to be perceived right or wrong,
Yeah, yeah. I've got to say, it's quite a bold approach to take towards it. I think generally people tend to set up all sorts of safety nets and things like that, but the idea of just going up to them and telling them all these things is a pretty radical way of doing it.
Well, I'm a big fan of pass or fail scenarios. It's the only way for me personally to feel like the research I'm doing is working. The end I'm working towards is a valuable one for me to be placed in these extreme situations of I'm either going to sink or I'm either going to swim, and it's how my skills work about in that situation. I forget the exact context in which it came up, but somebody was telling me about James Brown's aspect towards pickpocketing. you know, there's only so many times you can practice on a dummy. There's only so many times you can practice on a you know, some stationary aspect. The best way to learn is to go out and do it.
Yeah.
That's the only way you're really going to learn what works and what doesn't fast. And
Yeah. Just coming back to for a second the actual performance of deduction. Does it work different in a close-up sense to how it would on stage? For example, on stage, do you just point to someone in the audience and tell them things about himself, or are they too far away? Do you have to get them up on stage and make it a sort of close-up performance for it to work?
well, that's all about, you know, the theatrical setup for me. If I'm stood on stage, there would be a premise, there would be a hook, there would be something. So when I've done it before to those 5-10 minutes, if the person stood up and they are too far away, the lights are in my eyes and I can't really see them, because we all know when we stood on stage there are lights pointing at you and you can't see the audience all that well. And yeah, bring them up, make it a routine. Because
are these routines that you either do or don't do, depending on whether or not you can see the individuals in the audience?
They are. They would be further add-ons to a routine that's going to happen anyway, based on.
Could we have some examples of stuff that might be, or something?
Yeah. When I'm doing the like a kurotsuke type of effect, I'll get them up, I'll stand them up, and I'll talk about things like lies and lie detection and some of the signs and whatever. So, and then I'll go through a small deductive game. Then I'll play the 3 truths and a lie game with one person. And if it gets to the point that I can't really see their reactions, or I can't really see them, I can't hear them all that well. Sometimes that happens, you know. Then that's a reason. That's a natural reason for them to come closer, for them to come. So I can play this game properly. There's nothing wrong with saying, because we are using quite a real skill. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know, I can't see you all that well. Come closer so I can see you better. This will go a little more accurately that way, and you'll probably feel a bit better about it, because I won't be throwing some blind lines off into the dark because I can't exactly feel where you are.
Yeah.
It's not hiding behind these pattern lines. Don't be afraid to come out as it's natural lines. I can't see you all that well. Come closer a little bit.
Yeah.
Because they come closer, they feel involved. Then he's not just throwing these blind lines, and it works towards that same end for you. So absolutely, I've done it with the kurotsuke lines. There's times where I've been able to go through 3 or 4 members of the crowd doing this, and that's the kurotsuke plot over. There's been times when I can't see them, and I've brought one up. So okay, if I'm going to do the kurotsuke, the rest of the people have got to come up on stage, and that's got to happen for it to seem like one natural flowing element. If you have one person there, 2 people up on stage, then finish up with 1 person down near the front, it's going to look a bit, you know, disjointed. There's a narrative. If you get 1 person stood up, and then that sets the whole premise for the rest of the routine, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. As well as that, in terms of, we were discussing the importance of sort of memory and stuff like that in terms of actually practicing deduction. Yeah. Obviously, deduction isn't just a broad scale. There's little things involved in it, like lie detection, facial recognition, stuff like that. Yeah. So what would you say are the important tools that people research and that people get a grasp of before they try to do any sort of deduction?
My opinion would be, if you were a complete novice, never done anything like this before, is start off with the basics of memory work to get used to how it's done. Start off with Harry Lorraine's books, second to none. Dominic O'Brien's books, brilliant, because they've got these aspects of it that are basic. But once you get to grips with them, you can stretch them and stretch them and stretch them to infinite capacities. So they would be a good starting place for memory work. And then for reading people and profiling, I've liked Dan Corum's book, The Art of Profiling. It's getting used to reading people. Joe Navarro's work, Barbara and Alan Pease, Desmond Morris. These are excellent, strong foundations to work from, because they do cover a large topic of thinking and a large topic of looking at people. And from there, of working with this information, you can see these are the different avenues that you want to go down. Facial recognition stuff. You've got to look at the work of Paul Ekman. You've got to. It's second to none. And then when you get used to that, you can look at his work on lie detection. Pamela Hayes, I think her name is. She's got a quality book out on lie spotting. This book I'm reading at the minute is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
As well, and and then there's an absolute practice. If you've got an iPhone, download the apps for you to practice on. Download the memory apps. There are games you can get for your computer. Practice.
Yeah.
It makes perfect, you know. And for me, those are the most important aspects because they are the natural hub. Once you've learned to memorize, then you can memorize the more distinct and direct stuff. Once you've learned to read the basics of body language, then you can start to hone in on what exactly is going on. Once you've read the basics of people's faces and the basics of lie detection, you can start gathering that snowball to a larger size, you know? So
I think if we may draw back to the lie detection and body language reading and stuff like that, I think one of the main progressions that Dr. Ekman made was that when he was looking at it, he placed it into the context of the moment.
Yeah.
So if you look at other examples before that research was done, it was perhaps more if you look a particular way you might be lying, whereas we know that based on context you might not do those sorts of things. But obviously that's dependent on what that context is. It's dependent on what type of person you are, how you'll be feeling at the time.
Yeah, it's developing a baseline of the situation, isn't it, really?
Yeah. So how do you deduce things that will be relevant to lie detection? Obviously you can look at the type of people that they are, and obviously you can look at slight cues for emotions and stuff, but how do you judge the context? Are there any deductions you can make about the environment that you can infer they might behave a particular way?
Yeah, but it's comfort levels.
Yeah.
You ask them the questions, just ask them, you know, if you're performing there, are you your friends? You're in your own. You know, it's normal conversation, and then you can gauge the reaction from this. So, like you say, if I said to one, I saw a woman there, I'm performing for this woman. I so have you come on your own? Are you with friends? And she goes, I'm on my own, and looks down.
Yeah.
You know, maybe she feels quite guilty or almost embarrassed about this situation. This is a hot topic for her.
Yeah.
And then that gives me a gauge for an emotional baseline to follow. That if I ask her any questions about this, she'd be more inclined to be dishonest about it because she feels quite visually, you know, embarrassed or about being there on her own, or she doesn't feel as confident. Maybe would be a better word. Yeah. About being there on her own, and then you can find it out through normal, natural conversations. It's through everyday situations. Ask them questions, watch how they react, develop a baseline, take the time to look how they are at their norm, and their norm would be, you know, where their emotions are at rest, where it's standard conversation. You know, say this is standard conversation between us. I'm quite gesticulating, and as I've said, and I'm involved. I'm quite expressive. And all of a sudden, you ask me a question, and I go,
"Yeah."
Quite. That's visually quite an obvious tell that I've taken the time to differentiate my entire body, face, normalcy, based on this question you've had. That's an emotional peak, an emotional stress point, as Mr. Navarro would call it. Yeah. And that it is about recognizing these moments, these situations. They give you the hot topics to work from, based on how much of a baseline you've taken the time to develop. And these are all things that you can deduce from there.
Okay. So, in terms of actually getting a baseline, because obviously with deduction you have to get baselines for all sorts of behaviours. You have to know what to look for, what not to look for. Like you mentioned, getting a general sense of how people in your area might act.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's an important thing. So if you're traveling abroad, how do you quickly get a sense of what you should look out for? Because obviously cultural differences would apply.
Yeah.
So what sort of things would you look to research to give you the best hit rate during an effect?
Well, there's a quality series of books out. I think it's on about the 4th edition now. The do's and taboos of body language around the world.
Yeah.
The basic things that traveling businessmen are taught when they're dealing with all these different delegates from all around the world, and how to talk and act in these certain situations. And these are things that you would absolutely look to and absolutely look to research, because let's face it, from a logical and rational aspect, if you've got a trip or a performance that you're going on to a different part of the world, this will take planning. You will know in advance that you're going away. It won't just be the day after that you'll go. I mean, I'm sure it'll probably happen at some point, but it won't. 9 times out of 10, it won't just be the day after that you're booked to perform in another country halfway across the world. So you've got the time to look at these kind of things. You've got the time to look into their culture if it's something you know nothing about. And I think it was Inglourious Bastards, the film where just before the shoot up in the bar, and she's talking about Michael Fassbender ordering 3 drinks like this when the Germans order 3 drinks like this, or it's he ordered 3 drinks like this when the Germans order 3 drinks like this, and it's something as simple as this. Natural things like I believe in Japan this is 5, or this is 5. They wouldn't really understand this is 5. And it's about breaching these cultural boundaries and learning more about it. So if you wanted to pay complete homage or respect to somebody from the Orient side of the world, in particular Japan again, you would bow to them. You wouldn't go to shake their hands, because this is a Western response. It's a sign of respect for you to bow to them. And then there are certain words. I think in certain parts of Europe they shake for a yes and nod for a no.
Yeah.
And if you learn these topics and again memorize them, store them away correctly, then you have the basics with which to work from. Then it becomes about human interaction.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're going around the world, language is going to trip you up somewhere.
Yeah.
Because we all relate to the person that's speaking language barriers. But if you're talking to somebody of a different language that doesn't speak to it, they see the visual aspects of a smile. These are the 7 universal emotions. They see a smile, they know this is a happy scenario, Yeah. And it's human interaction. It's basics from there. So yeah, absolutely look into the different cultures from around the world. Look into the cultural displays, different cultural gestural emblems that are around the world, because sometimes so some deepest parts of Australia and Nigeria, you shouldn't stick your thumb out on the side of a road if you want to thumb a lift, because that means something quite derogatory and quite dastardly over there, whereas you're just looking for something as humble as a lift down the road,
Yeah, yeah.
So it's definitely a huge learning curve performing in other parts of non-English speaking worlds.
Yeah. I was going to say, I was a friend of mine recently, he went away, he's studying for a year in China, and he said to me when he was going there, he was going with no knowledge of the Chinese language, so he was saying to me, he's going to have to point to things on a menu and say how many he wants, and then his friend told him that their gestures are completely different, and he's got no tools to communicate, so it's a shocking level of difference in the way that we actually communicate.
Yeah, there was a time I was over there when I was looking at the Shaolin martial arts schools, and I had my head skinned at the time, so I'm walking around the skin, and we're with the tour guide, me and my mom. And as I'm walking through the streets, there's these people looking at me going, gathering their children to get out of my way as I walk past. And it wasn't only until we'd been there for a couple of days that the tour guide said, yeah, in China, if you've got a shaved head, you're either a monk or a criminal or an ex-con. And since I wasn't wearing the monk robes, they all just assumed I got out of prison. That's why they were, a 14-year-old boy, I was horrified by that, these people thinking I was some kind of criminal.
Well, that's good to know as well. That's
it's a different aspect of a different culture. Yeah.
Something else I'd like to mention, when you're looking at people and deducing from them, do you just take it in as a whole picture? Do you look at them and look at everything all at once, or do you focus on key aspects, one thing at a time, and draw a whole picture from little points?
For me, I start with the most outstanding characteristic about them.
Yeah.
And I don't mean outstanding as a sense, oh, that's outstanding, that's great. I mean, it stands out the most, Like, if somebody's taken great pains to go through dreadlocks and dye them in a crazy color, this is a huge thing for them. There's a lot of personality and a lot of personal time spent into crafting this look. So that for me, that is where I would start, because that suggests that it would be the most reliable thing about it.
Yeah.
For me, when most people see me, they either comment on the fact that I'm big built, I'm hairy, or I'm covered in tattoos.
Yeah.
The three things that stand out the most, and the tattoos themselves will tell you a lot about me. The hair necessarily won't tell you a lot about me, but well, then I'm perhaps descendant more closely to apes than I realise. And the fact that I'm quite big built tells you about my home life. That I go to the gym, that I might have to eat in a specific way, which tells you something about my personality. And the tattoo, and it's these situations. So for me, I've always found the best and most reliable tell is to start with the most outstanding characteristic about it, about the person, sorry, because that is what's been crafted the most. If there is something that you can't pick out to be the most outstanding characteristic about a person, like, say, as you said earlier, they are average in every sense.
Yeah.
I personally would start with clothes and then move inwards, as it were. Because this is these are the shells that we put on ourselves to show the rest of the world almost, and they will still provide a plethora of evidence with which to deduce from there, as we said earlier. So yeah, absolutely, in my opinion, but most reliable tell to start with would be the most outstanding characteristic. Failing that would be clothes and moving inward.
Yeah. Another question I've got would be, and this isn't something fixed, this is based on your own personal preference. When you're doing deductions, you'll find that certain things come up more frequently than others.
Yeah.
You find, for example, that the things that you can make less inferences from probably come up more frequently. But that would be things that come up very rarely, but you can make very powerful inferences from them things. So my question would be, if you had to pick three things that were your favourite in terms of how frequently they can be used, and how specific they seem, what would be your favourite deductions?
Ooh. I think I think number one, it's got to be things like tattooing.
Yeah.
Because tattooing, when you think about it from a rational aspect, somebody's put so much time and so much design effort to get something that's so personal for them to be put onto their body for ostensibly the rest of their lives. These are the most telling of things, but there are also the signs that will point out for people that get drunken tattoos, for people that get backdoor tattoos done in Blackpool somewhere by some. These are all telling characteristics that are permanent, and they literally can't wash off. And so absolutely number one has got to be tattoos, because that, for me, that covers all boundaries of telling things about a person. Like I often quote that people could look at me and have just by looking at me and have a pretty good idea what my girlfriend's name is.
Yeah.
Which when you say that to somebody, you go, what? How? And then you point out the obvious, that there is a fairly obvious emblem staring them quite in the face, literally almost. And then you look at the initials, it's a C and a H. There's only so many girls' names that begin with a C. So it's just something as small as that, So yeah, tattoos number one. Then sorry, I've just knocked a great deal of my own research onto the floor. I shall get that shortly. That's my fault for being so jocular. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm like when I get emotionally involved. I want to talk and demonstrate. But anyway, yeah, number 2 would have to be either, and it's going to sound like quite a weird one. It would have to be either clothes or shaving patterns on men.
Yeah.
Because I've found that clothes, for an obvious reason, because people shop at the places that they want to dress themselves. Like I said before, the shells that we want to present to the world. There's a certain type of person that'll shop at Harrods. There's a certain type of person that'll shop at Primark. There's a certain type of person that gets their clothes from Burton, menswear, anything, you know. Yeah. And these are important aspects for me, and you can adorn them with emblems of your likes. There are superhero T-shirts, TV show T-shirts, specific clothes made for rock climbers, for free runners, for runners, for mountain, and all this spirals out of control. But again, with shaving patterns as well, this is more one of those things that pop up less frequently than the clothes and the tattoos do, but they're always a direct way to go. Because the bloke, per se, not necessarily the woman, because I don't know a lot of women with beards. I don't visit the circus nearly enough. But the bloke has taken time to craft this, and has often gone through the pain of pulling out those short, nasty hairs that won't come out. We've taken time and pain to create and craft this. Yeah. This almost artistic image that we want to show to the world means something.
Yeah.
So I definitely would be a 2-part number 2 space. And so for number 3, it's got to be speech patterns and accents and dialects, and because again that's something we can't hide. A lot of people say to me that I'm quite well spoken for a Stokey. Yeah. I'm born in Stoke through and through, when you and I both know that the natural dialect of the Potter's language is all "Oh, kid, I'll tell you right," and which to anybody watching would just sound like I've spoken gibberish or another language.
Yeah.
Then that tells you things about me. Why do I speak in the way that I do? Accents reveal your home, reveal where you are. So if you find I don't know if you find someone from North Yorkshire residing in the bottom half of East London, there is a story there. There's a story there of the geographical move. Yeah. If you find an American mixed with an Irish twang, there's a story there. It's the same, and then there'll be specific words, specific hot topic words that leak out, like there's only a certain type of people within a specific remit of hobbies that describe good things as being sick, or there's only people describe things as being heavy, or when not necessarily meaning to weight. So language patterns, specifically talking about missing out obvious words. People talk like, to come back to Stoke, I can't do this, and we mess up our 2s and our 4s. I was going for bring this over here instead of going to bring this over here.
Yeah.
The language, speech, accents, very telling for me. So that would absolutely be my top 3. Yeah. Possibly with smells. Bringing up. Yeah. That's just.
Why smells?
Smells. Well, aftershave, personal hygiene, different cigarettes, food is sold in different places, burger vans. How can I put it quite nicely for a general audience? That certain narcotics have a certain type of smell, and these are all telling again about the specific person and whatnot. So you say to somebody, you went to the gym a couple of hours ago. Have you bought any more Marlboro fags since you've been there?
Yeah.
So you can tell by the fact that they've covered up the sweat smell with a loose gaggling of deodorant, and you can smell the type of cigarettes that they use.
Yeah, I think as well it's important to mention a lot of people are very fixed on sight and sound in terms
Yeah,
of the senses that they use, but using smells. This is something I wasn't familiar was such a big part of deduction, but I had a moment a while back where I just sat there with my eyes closed, just taking in smells and trying to guess certain things about the world around me based on that. And the
yeah,
person next to me smelled a little bit like, you get them chocolate bars with the wafer in the middle.
yeah,
It just smelled a little bit like one, and it was specifically a chocolate bar with a wafer in the middle. So I
yeah.
asked them, "Have you eaten a chocolate bar with a wafer in the middle today?" And they freaked out. And I think actually sitting there and just allowing your smell sense to just take hold is a very important thing. But it's like you say with the Bruce Lee thing, with the sound going in one ear and the sound going in the other ear, and you've got to focus it. It's about blanking out your other senses for a moment, because at the end of the day, you can focus on one thing at a time.
Absolutely.
So you've got to blank out everything else if you're going to focus on these smells. So I think there's a practice element involved in that.
Absolutely. I do similar things when Charlie comes home from work, because she goes out for her breaks into smoking, not just for the sake of getting out of the sin. She doesn't smoke, but she goes out there for the breaks, and based on the smell of wet wood and any second-hand smoke, I can be like, so you had this many breaks and with this person today, and she'd be like, shut up, just shut up, right? And that's just from the smells alone, as you said. It's quite a different thing, but that's just reminded me of another aspect that I came up with the Bruce Lee training. Once you've got used to doing it with the relaxing music and heavy metal, put something on in this here that's not necessarily just loud, but that you love. So, like, say, you put your favourite song on here, the one that you like to sing along to in the shower.
Yeah.
Put it on in ear, on repeat, and then see if you can still concentrate on the relaxing music. Then, because then that's learning more about quieting your emotional side. It's the step up from that first training. Yeah. But that's relevant to your previous question, and that's just something that popped in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question I'd have would be when you're doing deduction and stuff, you take on the role of a certain character.
Yeah.
Just like if you do children's entertainment, you might take on the role of a sort of lovable clown, something like that. When you're a deductionist, you take on this kind of Sherlockian presence.
Yeah.
And it's not just the people that you perform for that pick this up. Friends, loved ones, all sorts of people pick this up. So my question would be, if you're in a group of people that you know, what sort of deductions might you deal out if they ask to see something? Or if someone you know says to you, deduce something from me, obviously it would be terrible to deduce something that you could already know from being their friend. So what would you do? Would you deduce from someone else? Or do you have specific personal things that you try to point out?
Well, I think, again, that depends largely on your friends. There will be those that have seen that much of what you do and what you love, and have reached that point where they're almost desensitized to a degree. So if you can, I often revert back to the little things with those type of people, like you rest your foot on your knee when you're tying your shoelaces, because the shoelaces are off to one side as opposed to tied in the middle. When you lean forward to do it this way, tie your shoelaces in the middle. When you bring your foot up to do it this way, you tie them off to one side. It's the little things I've found, as opposed that are more acute, almost, and more specific, that appeal to those kinds of people. But yeah, with friends, I've often found that asking them questions about their friends that I don't know, because there are aspects that we don't know everybody. I've got friends that have friends that I've never met before, and I'll be like, so tell me something about them. Show me a picture of them, and I'll see what I can deduce from that. And that's another way to get fresh into deduction, because you're taking a huge amount of evidence right down to its basic key points, because they'll present the basic key points for you. Like, he's Dave, he works in IT, done it for about 20 years.
Yeah.
And then as you get a question like, oh, so does he like his job? Not really.
Yeah.
And then that raises more questions. Why would you stay in a job for 20 years if you don't really like it? Is he blah, 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 blah. And it's all about getting these points specifically for friends. These hot topics, these friends are an interesting way to practice the more difficult side of things.
Yeah.
Like when I was practicing my grabbing coins out of the jar and throwing them onto the floor, flash memory, counting them.
Yeah.
I forget who was talking about this. I think Peter Turner was talking about the sound of. I don't know for sure, but you can hear the way coins rub against each other in a pocket and they make sounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a good way to guess and almost deduce properly what's in somebody's pocket or how much money they've got. You know, that's a brilliant game to play with close friends and people. But yeah, and if they bring these people around that you've never met before, you've got a fresh meat to go for with the practice aspect and the practice levels of absolutely everything from start to finish.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, mouse messing up. I think it's during the sort of time that we normally come to. I think as a sort of more final thing, is there anything else that you feel needs to be covered? Anything else you'd like to teach? Already you taught a lot, but anything else you feel you'd like to mention?
A couple of ideas and a couple of games to practice, just to again, there will be people that already do this, but this is more specifically for the people that are complete novice. You know.
Yeah.
Take the room of somewhere that you frequent quite a lot, you and other people.
Yeah.
Take a mental picture of everything in the room as best you can.
Yeah.
You can only do it as best you can. Leave for a couple of hours, then come back. You know, there will be things that have gone on like the remote controls moved to another place. There's now a coffee cup on the side. There's a TV magazine open to a specific page from a couple of days from now. This raises questions. There's a bum print on somebody's favorite seat on which so you begin to raise these questions based on things you already know, which is a good practice level to be in, to begin to reason backwards from what you see, which is again the whole deduction induction thing. And it's a great way to practice because you're in this safe environment to build confidence with. You're doing it properly, because there's no one around to help you. And then you have the added bonus of these being people you know, so there's no problem with asking them or deducing to confirm your initial deductions were correct. And it's a great practice to get into reason backwards from the ideas that you see. And so that's a brilliant game to play. And then you increase the rooms, and then you start doing rooms that you've never been in before. Because even with rooms you've never been in before, you can see the comfort level. You can see what specific objects are by near seat. Like the lady of the house might keep her hairbrush or her favourite book or something like this, and her favourite chair. And then that is absolutely a great game to play for deduction induction practice. I have
to say as well, that sort of thing of memorising the room that you've just been in, it's also a lady killer. Like, my girlfriend at the moment, Tasha, the thing that actually first got her interested was that I was at a friend's party, and there were some coins stacked on a table, and I'd been looking around the room and noticed that these coins were stacked, and they were very neatly stacked. Yeah. So I left the room for a number of hours, and when I came back, they were neatly stacked in the exact same position, but with the coins in slightly different places.
Yeah.
Like all the coins were in different positions.
Yeah.
So I pointed out somebody's moved these coins around and then put them in the same place, clearly specifically to test whether I would notice that the coins were in the same place.
Yeah.
And it freaks people out because they don't realise that you're necessarily going to pay attention to that sort of thing.
I had a similar situation when me and Charlie first got together. We were watching I think we were watching a film or something, and I left for a bit to go to work. Came back, and her Rubik's cube on the shelf was different colours facing forward. Yeah. So I was like, So did you have any success with the Rubik's Cube this time? She was like, yeah. And all you've done is you've just paid attention to a few colours on the side, and so yeah, absolutely brilliant game to play. And another good game is I Spy. You know, the I Spy with my little eye, something beginning with, but when you're not in the room.
Yeah.
That's the great game to play, because when you come back to the room, it's observation testing, and which you can zero in on these little things that are in front of you.
Yeah.
And you can extend that to a ridiculous degree with the names of authors on books that you own, you know, the names of DVDs on the shelf. It just depends on how much you practice that. So I Spy with my little eye.
Trained your eye to look at specific details.
Yeah, absolutely. I often play it with Charlie when I'm on the train down to a gig somewhere or something, just to keep me going. You'll tell me the room of the house she's in, and then something beginning with B or whatever. Then it's my job to go round all of the room, know which chair she's more than likely going to be sat in my absence.
Yeah.
Go from there with the game. So these are excellent practice games, and then an excellent practice starter deduction when you're out there doing it for real people is just simply whether people are right or left-handed.
Yeah.
That is it's something so small and something so almost insignificant as which is your more dominant hand.
Yeah.
But it's an excellent practice game, and you can get it from so many things. You know, the way their knives and forks are set on the table. What side of the plate their drink is in front of them, the thickness of their thumbs. These are practice things that you can begin to look for to not just guess, but know, because we all know that a large percentage of the public are just right-handed anyway.
Yeah.
But it's a good practice game to be able to know. So these are hot topic things to look out for when deducing that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think also for sort of beginner level deductions and stuff, obviously telling which hand people use to write is quite a straightforward one. I've always found body language is pretty easy, because body language, a lot of things are very symbolic. So, for example, that's very obvious what the body language is, just in the same way that someone putting their fist on the table while they're talking to someone leaning on a table. It's pretty symbolic of what it might be.
Yeah, but that'll test your context analysis, because if somebody at rest or somebody at norm sits with their arms crossed, then that's more comfort than it is, aggressive or not bothered or bored or whatever. If that pops up randomly, then it begins to suggest these new kind of things. So yeah, body language absolutely will test your context baseline analysis and how much you can follow on from that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Right. I was going to say this is just a final thing, just to give people a sense, because obviously we're all very grateful for you doing this thing and sense of how you work. In terms of work that you've already got out and work that's coming out, what sort of things should we be looking out for if we want to get into this deduction? Which works would you say are the best? Which reasons?
Well, it's taken a lot of flack, this book, but I personally am very vested in the lessons that Maria Konikova's mastermind teaches.
Yeah.
I found a lot of good work and a lot of good thinking in there if you can look past the stories that she tells about her life, the lessons that she imparts on observational awareness are really quite poignant for me. Then there's the monolithic book that myself and Joe have on the way, which who knows when that's going to be out? No, but we're told towards the end of the year that's going to be out.
And could you give us a basic idea of sort of how many topics are in that? Because I know you were mentioning that it was going to have a pretty broad overview.
It's imagine almost everything you would need to know, down from how to differentiate the difference between cat and dog hair.
Yeah.
What specific type of geological mud will appear mostly on the most statistical probability of boots. There's cultural displays. There's tattoo symbology. There's facial reading, lie detection, training, philosophy, theory, history. It's like this as a book. We've put our heads together on only what we feel has been the most beneficial to us in what we've done so far. And so we've done this from a sense of trying to cover it from every angle. So it will be more than suitable for mentalists, magicians, psychics, but it wouldn't be out of the remit of possibility for lawyers, policemen, forensics, these type of people to look into the lessons in the book, because we looked from lessons from all of these aspects and put them into the same book as well. So more than likely, every one of those category of people will get something out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other books I would look for would be books from the leading thinkers in the specific fields I've already said. So yeah, Harry Lorraine and Dominic O'Brien for the memory stuff. Then you start to look into the history of Memory Palace work and why they were created in the way that they did. The Memory Palace of Matteo Ricci is a quality book. There's other sort of annals of memory work to look for. Then you look at the body language work of Joe Navarro, Barbara and Alan Pease, as said Desmond Morris. Joe Navarro's got a lesson, a course, a degree almost that he does through his websites, which is just it's gargantuan in aspect. It was such a lot of fun to do. And so yeah, then you start looking at Dr. Ekman's work, and then you look at the surrounding work from there, even the people that were opposing him almost. So you can get the truth, both sides and both ways of thinking. I'm more of a fan of Paul Ekman's work, but you have to learn more about the people that tried to provide the controversy of the situation, Ray Birdwell. These kind of people will help you further understand the topics that were going on. And then for me, once you get this way of being constantly learning, constantly practicing, constantly sharpening your blade, it's a never-ending aspect. I read anything by everyone on any topic that I consider to be relevant to my situation. I love the criminal profiling books. I've only just recently read Corinda's 13 Steps, and there's some aspects in there that you can definitely use for deduction and memory work specifically. The mnemonics chapter is an incredible basic aspect of memory work. It's brilliant.
I think if you look into the world of psychology as well, there are huge sort of databases full of journals and all sorts of stuff from all sorts of psychologists. And if you look back to when criminal profiling was first sort of coming about, there's examples of research into these areas showing how it might affect like crimes and stuff like that, things that Sherlock Holmes would focus on.
Yeah. Well, there was a chap by the name of Edmond Locard in France that took the teachings of almost the teaching, well, not necessarily the teachings, but the lessons that he could pick up in Conan Doyle's canon of books. And it's widely believed now by most modern forensic psychologists and forensic scientists now that without these initial lessons, without Conan Doyle's work, that modern sort of detective capabilities wouldn't have come this far without that as a basis. So it's almost, for me, it's almost proof that this type of stuff is real. It works. And it's worth the time invested in it.
Yeah. Something else I'd like to mention. You've mentioned the big book that's coming out. Have you got anything else to say about any other new releases that you've got coming out? Is there anything you can share with us?
Yeah, I have my my book that Anthony Jacquin came up with a title for, and I totally used it because it's an incredible title. Yeah. It's called Speed Deduction.
Yeah.
I love that as a title. I thought it was brilliant. So it's called Speed Deduction, and one of the routines in there is called Speed Deduction as well. But in that, I'm focused more on the routines that I use when I'm out doing deduction for real. And it's more routines based on my way of thinking of having the mechanics of a simple yet powerful effect to fall back on. But there's also a considerable number of works on how to pepper them with real deductive skills, like the real reading of faces, the real detecting of lies, the real deducing of graphological traits, you know, the real photo reading capabilities, real memory, this kind of thing.
So it's less of a sort of contemplation of like a more theoretical thing. Like, for example, just a list of things that you're deducing.
No.
It's more a practical application.
It's like a practical toolbox of things that you can use.
Yeah, so it's something that will be more specific to mentalists and magicians.
Yeah,
that's absolutely fantastic. I think that just about wraps things up, unless there's anything else that you'd like to mention.
I'm happy as the proverbial Larry, sir.
Okay, and on that note, I'd like to end with, again, a huge thank you to you. Obviously, it's a great resource for BIMP members to be able to get the thoughts and opinions from the people that are out there actually working this stuff. It's an honour and a privilege for myself and the many members of BIMP to have you contributed to the group in this way. So I'd like to end with a big thank you to you.
My pleasure, thank you.
So, yeah, thank you very much, Ben.
Not a problem, mate. Take care.
Okie dokie. And on that note, we shall end.
Bye.